Hey everyone, it's Kelly Azevedo, and I wanted to record this video to share something that I am posting on Medium, and I'm going to do my best to post these two simultaneously so you can go there and read it. But I also thought it was really important for me to actually speak it and share it here. So the first thing I want to do is reference an article which is going to be important to what I'm sharing. And it's an article that is about Schrodinger's rapist. And it can be something that is triggering for people if you have sensitivity around sexual assault. So I want to give you that warning. But I'll put a link to the article, and I'm going to read a section of it because I think it did a really great job helping men understand what women potentially think when they interact with you. And here's a quote from the article. It says, "The first thing you need to understand is that women are dealing with a set of challenges and concerns that are strange to you, a man. To begin with, we would rather not be killed or otherwise violently assaulted. But wait, I don't want that either. Well, no, but do you think about it all the time? Is preventing violent assault or murder part of your daily routine, rather than merely something you do when you venture into war zones? Because for women, it is. When I go on a date, I always leave the man's full name and contact information written next to my computer monitor. This is so the cops can find my body if I go missing. My best friend will call me or email me the next morning, and I must answer that call or email before noonish, or she begins to worry. If she doesn't hear from me by 3 or so, she'll call the police. My activities after dark are curtailed. Unless I am a densely occupied, well-lit space, I won't go out alone. Even then, I prefer to have a friend or two or my dogs with me. Do you follow rules like this?" She continues, "So when you, a stranger, approach me, I have to ask myself, will this man rape me? Do you think I'm overreacting? 1 in every 6 women will be sexually assaulted in her lifetime. I bet you don't think you know any rapists, but consider the sheer number of rapes that must occur. These rapes are not all committed by Philip Garrido, Brian David Mitchell, or other members of the Brotherhood of Scary Hair and Homemade Religion. While you may assume that none of the men you know are rapists, I can assure you that at least one is. Consider, if every rapist commits an average of 10 rapes, a horrifying number, isn't it? Then the concentration of rapists in the population is still a little over 1 in 60. That means 4 in my graduating class in high school, 1 amongst my coworkers, 1 in the subway car at rush hour, 11 who work out at my gym. So how do I know that you, the nice guy who wants nothing more than companionship and true love, are not this rapist? I don't." And this is the part where I really want you to understand. When you approach me in public, you are Schrodinger's rapist. You may or may not be a man who would commit rape. I don't know for sure until you start sexually assaulting me. I can't see inside your head, and I don't know your intentions. If you expect me to trust you, to accept you at face value as a nice sort of guy, you are not only failing to respect my reasonable caution, you're being cavalier about my personal safety. Now, the author goes on in this article to talk about context and how if you were introduced by your mother at church, it may be a little less than if you approach her in a dark alley. But the signals that she's talking about there around personal safety are really important to what I'm going to share next. And the thing that I really liked about this article and how it was articulated is that when a man becomes very pushy in a public or personal setting, when he insists on talking to you when you're not in the mood, when he just wants to have a conversation or buy you a drink or dance and you say no and he ignores that, the article makes the point that you move the needle of Schrodinger's racist closer to the side of you could be a racist, or you could be a rapist, because you are not respecting someone else's agency and choices. And if you're on a bus and you're reading a book and somebody wants to have a discussion about that book and you've had a long day at work and you just want to read your book in silence and they don't take no for an answer, that tells you as a woman that they may not take no for an answer when you say, "No, I don't want to sleep with you," or "You can't come up," or any other situation. And so the way that you signal in seemingly innocent conversations tells the other person a lot about the way you could behave. And again, the author makes a good point that we don't know if you're going to behave that way as a rapist would until it begins. So with that little bit of background, I want to read something that I have been writing and writing and writing for a couple days now, and rewriting a lot to make sure I'm confronting and really talking about the things in a strong way and a way that's not shifting blame. And the tentative title of the piece will probably be Silence Makes Me Schrodinger's Racist. And here's what I share. I've been avoiding the post, avoiding talking about this for way too long, and I want to start by acknowledging that and share what's been going on in my head. What I allowed to stop me is honestly just a bunch of excuses, and those excuses might also be running through your mind unchecked. Now, the first thing is the nature of my business has not changed. I do not teach or sell programs or provide support around topics of spirituality, activism, diversity, or racial awareness, and I don't purport myself to be a thought leader or guru in any of these areas. I do still teach entrepreneurs how to use systems to streamline, grow, and transform their businesses, and that itself has not changed. But for a long time, it's been easy to stick to that lane and focus on that work I'm here to do. And there are a lot of businesses that need this support, so I really doubt that I'll have an abundance of time in the future. And I might not have spare time, but I'm really done staying quiet on these issues. They're plaguing my industry, online entrepreneurship in general, and indeed our whole country. But there's other work besides your industry that we're called to do. So even if your industry does not appear to be impacted by these conversations happening about race, activism, and diversity, we still need to speak up. So knowing that, I started asking myself, what do I say? When do I say it? Where do I say it? How do I say it? All these questions. And if you've known me for a while, then you probably would agree that I've always been a bit of a leader. So whether it was with my friends at summer camp or organizing a minor mutiny against the RA in college, I identify as a leader. And there are plenty of topics where I readily admit I know nothing. So calculus, string theory, chakras, nothing. But it's always been hard for me to speak about things that, and speak confidently when I think I should be a leader. I think I should know more, but I know that I'm absolutely not a leader. And for months now, what I've been doing is fighting my own tendencies. My tendency to wait until I know enough or until I have perfect, ideal words to share. I was a debater in college, and the debate training I received taps me on my shoulder and says, well, you have to look at all the sides, you have to look at all the sources, the historical implications, all of that before you speak. So when it comes to talking about race, to talking about entrepreneurship and speaking up, a lot of factors were there, and I allowed them to stop me from sharing in the past. There's fear, worry, unease, doubt, just to name a few. Now, many of these will come from a good place, and I'm kind of putting that in quotes because the intention in some cases matters and in some cases don't, but you might find them familiar. So I want to protect my brand, my team, my reputation. I really desire to support without co-opting the conversations that are happening. I want to lend my voice without centering my own perspective or concerns. I don't want to stir things up. I don't want to risk an upcoming launch or my future business success. And I am, in some ways, afraid of backlash, missing a really crucial part of the conversation or stepping on my carefully chosen words. And in order to step out and share, I have to first acknowledge that it's really my privilege to just stick to my business and ignore the issue of race. In case you cannot tell, I'm white, and there are no substantial disadvantages to the pigment of the skin I was born into. And I say substantial disadvantages because no, sunburn is not really a disadvantage. And I've also done a 23andMe DNA test and learned I am super white. Like 99.8% European, which is made up of British, Irish, French, German, and Portuguese, and 0.2% East Asian and Native American. My heritage is white, European, and American. And if I wanted to ignore race and focus on business systems, my white privilege gives me that option. But I'm not doing that, and here's why. So there's silence as complicity, and silence is listening. And too often the silence of white people, myself included, is based in complicity and ignorance. So we say stupid things like, we don't see race, or we hear the examples of racial disparity all around us and say nothing. And maybe we don't know what to say, so we choose silence. And silence in the face of ignorance is not common. Universally can go around this country and ask the average American their opinion on anything from voting rights to Game of Thrones, and you'll get opinions galore, absent any factual evidence or critical thinking. But suddenly on the subject of race, we're silent. I can't pretend not to see racism, and you shouldn't either. And in some ways, this reminds me of the fateful day when my family realized we had been inadvertently stealing cable for 8 years. We had a technician out the house to look at something, and they pointed out that we had an illegal connection to premium channels. And it brought us this vague recollection of a friend of the family who worked at the cable company who, like 8 years earlier, had fixed something in our box. And my parents had gotten like one of those bonus weeks of premium channels, and then it never expired and we never realized it. And at that point, we'd become dependent on Animal Planet and the Food Network, so my parents made the choice to start paying full price. But at that point, we became aware of our ignorance and the benefits we'd been receiving for years. We didn't ask for the advantage. It was happening without our awareness, but we still benefited. And I would say we also weren't looking very closely, and I was in high school, so I wasn't exactly paying the bills, but it's a similar idea here. Now, there's another form of silence, and that's the one that happens when you're in a deep place of listening and respect. And it's really tempting to say I'm in this place when I'm really just afraid of speaking up. So for months, I've been researching and reading, and now my worry is that the silence of respectful learning is going to be interpreted as complicity. It's easy to get stuck in staying quiet so we can read one more book or one more article, or because someone else is more qualified to speak. And again, nothing will keep most people from sharing their opinion on sports or politics or anything, even when others are infinitely more qualified to speak. But when it comes to racism, we collectively stay quiet. Someone else will always be more informed, have a bigger platform, have a distinct outlook. But racism depends on the, quote, good white people staying quiet and accepting it. So staying quiet to listen has value, but it does not last indefinitely. Silence can easily become complicity. And the cultural significance of staying quiet cannot be ignored. As a white woman, I could say nothing because I'm really not at risk, and because I still benefit from this situation, even if I didn't ask for it or actively recognize it. At the moment, I'm reading a beautifully heartbreaking book, The Warmth of Other Suns, and in early chapters, author Isabel Wilkinson has showed that it's not just the white men who made up a lynch mob who were feared, but the white women who stood silently complicit. This pattern is repeating right now in 2018, just as it has for centuries. So I had to ask myself really honestly, does my silence indicate that I am listening, hearing, learning, educating myself, or am I hiding? Now that's a question that you can only answer for yourself, but one of the very real reasons I decided to write this post, make this video, is that I don't want my silence to be seen as hiding, and I don't want to speak in a way that's self-congratulatory. Over the past several months of reading, learning, and listening, I still have more questions than answers. I know I'm not a leader in this space, and I don't aspire to take that role. I will continue to be a listener, a supporter, and a champion for those doing the work. And there are a few things I've learned, and I try to remember every time I step into the arena of discussions about race, equality, diversity, and culture. And I try to remind myself of these regularly, and I hope they help you as well. The first is that when anybody else sets a boundary, you need to respect it. It doesn't matter if I like the boundary, if I agree with it, I feel like I have something to say. I have to acknowledge a boundary and follow it because all of that stems from respect. So for example, someone creates a post on social media and they state, this space, this post is for Black, Indigenous, people of color only, then it is not my place to comment on that post. We've already established I'm white, and so if I were to comment, I'd be intentionally violating that boundary. Now, anyone who violates boundaries immediately signals disrespect, and that's when you can become Schrodinger's racist. The behavior may not be violent and dangerous to Black, Indigenous, people of color, but the signs are there. And could you really blame someone for keeping the distance? As I shared in the intro about the term Schrodinger's rapist, it's a term given to men, all men, to indicate their likelihood to violently assault women. The more a man ignores a woman's boundaries, the higher is the chance that he is dangerous. And so in the same way, when you violate the boundaries of Black, Indigenous, people of color, you are signaling that disrespect and you're signaling that you could also be dangerous. And really, in order to grasp this fully, I had to understand the cultural context with a heavy dose of empathy. So instead of stamping away like a child who was told you can't play with us, I really had to understand that for centuries, Black, Indigenous, people of color have been told your opinions don't matter, you cannot set or enforce boundaries, and what we white people want is what matters most. So it doesn't matter if I want to share. It doesn't matter if I want to be part of the conversation. My feelings are not more important than someone else's boundaries. And again, if this is hard for you to grasp, I want you to reimagine the context and the scenario inside the Me Too movement. So if you're a woman talking to friends after work, imagine a colleague comes up to you and inserts himself into the conversation. He repeatedly hits on you, he tries to get you to go to his private office, he brushes up against you in a suggestive manner, he keeps interrupting the conversation, wanting to be acknowledged, and you can ask him politely to leave, to stop touching you, to leave you alone multiple times. But what would likely happen next? He might force himself on you, push you into an empty hallway. And maybe that's similar to you inserting yourself into a conversation because it's what you want. Who cares about what they want? He might say his feelings are hurt and you're just a mean bitch. In the same way that you might cry that someone has excluded you and your feelings are hurt. He might lash out and say he's going to put you in your place. And in the same way, you might turn away from Black, Indigenous, people of color and refuse to listen or support or encourage them because you're mad and they deserve it. These are the same patterns that repeat, and the same way that you might want to fight against a patriarchy and the way they allow this to happen, you need to see that same context repeating itself with people of color. Respecting boundaries is a very minimal request to honor the choices of other people. And you need to understand, and I had to understand, that one person violently inserting their preferences and will over another is a repeating pattern that needs to be broken. The second thing I had to remember is that spend time, more than I'm spending now, understanding racism. You're probably aware of the conversations that have happened about emotional labor. And if you're unfamiliar, I'll link to a resource in the comments, starting with an article that covers emotional labor in terms of housework. Now, if you've experienced this frustration in your own home or life, you have a tiny sliver of understanding of the scope. Imagine that instead of your own spouse expecting you to raise the children, do the dishes, take out the trash, make repair appointments, mow the lawn, and do everything in your shared home, there's now an entire world of privileged white people who expect you to, on demand, stop everything you're doing and meet their needs and requests. There's all these happening online. You see them, requests for book recommendations, historical context, resources, proving yourself, article links, even lists of the good white people to follow and the bad people we should be avoiding. Not only are you expected by doing this emotional labor to provide this information, education absolutely free and on demand, but also with the right attitude. And it's all for somebody who has enormous privilege who can't be bothered to Google or go to the library on their own time. And that's unacceptable. There are literally thousands of free resources at our disposal. We need to find them, consume them, and share them, and act like an adult who sees the problem and is willing to put in the work, rather than an infant who wants to be spoon-fed everything. Demanding that others do this work for you, even when couched in polite terms like, help me out here, or I just want to learn more, simply shifts the onus back on the very person who has been disadvantaged, violated, and discriminated against. Doing the work means taking responsibility for my own education. And I understand that I'm not really primed to do my own work in most areas of life. There are teachers who tell us what books to read, how and when to write a paper. You've probably had a boss like I did at one time that directed everything you did and what to make a priority. But now you have to make this education your priority. And I understand that you're busy. Who isn't? You have things going on in your life. But this is the test. Do you care more about catching up with The Voice and spring cleaning your windows, or dismantling the systematic continual oppression of Black, Indigenous, and people of color in our neighborhoods, our businesses, and our communities? We each have the opportunity here to vote with our time, so choose wisely. Investing time in understanding racism is a very minimal step of taking personal responsibility for your ignorance. The third thing that I want to remember is that it's time to pay for the resources and appreciate those who make them available to you. There are free resources available, but when you have the means, you also need to pay for them. That means buying books, taking courses, tipping when you read articles, becoming Patreons, hiring consultants, and purchasing art of disadvantaged and disenfranchised people. If you're under the assumption that you're going to need thousands of dollars in order to support those doing the work, then you're just delusional. Most Patreon setups allow you to donate as little as $1, and a lot of authors have set up like a virtual tip jar so you could do something as small as buying them a cup of coffee. Something that you might do for a homeless person or the person in line behind you at Starbucks. It takes remarkable courage for somebody to admit and confront their blind spots, acknowledge where they have been wrong, and then thank the person who has pointed it out to them. But it's not all that unusual. You do it when you know there's a problem. We all go to the dentist and we pay him or her to tell us that we need to floss better or that we have a cavity. We pay a mechanic to tell us our brake pads are worn or we need new tires. We pay doctors for diagnoses all the time. We pay business consultants for advice and lawyers to explain how screwed we are. Why would you not similarly pay the people of color who are showing us our biases, our patterns of destructive behavior, and the injustices we're perpetuating? One of the best things I read was from Tori Patillo, who said in a recent article, "Pay me for my time or listen silently and take notes on the way you can step up." And in that spirit, I'm going to share a very small list of the people that I'm currently learning from in the comments. It is not comprehensive and extensive, but it's my starting point and not an ending place. And finally, it's not about me. I know that this is me talking to a camera and that's very self-indulgent, but this topic is not about me. For as long as I can remember, I hated being a follower. I hated jumping on the bandwagon. So much so that when we'd have the big family dinners, everyone would lavish praise on my grandma Janelle for her great food, and I often felt really fake chiming in. So I would do things differently. I would help with the dishes or give her an extra hug before bed and tell my friends how she makes the best pies in the world. And she still does. I'll point that out. But one of the fears I let stop me from sharing was the idea that I would be posting this to get the approval of others, to somehow anoint myself as one of the good ones or get some positive attention from it. And that's not the point. The Bible verse that always comes to mind for me on this is Matthew 6:1. Be careful not to perform your righteous acts before men to be seen by them. If you do, you will have no reward from your Father in heaven. And to that extent, I'm writing and I'm sharing this to stay open to things I need to learn, to confront the fears that I let stop me from speaking, and to encourage others to do the same. Those who do this work on a daily basis pay a toll that the rest of us will never understand. They're the ones who deserve your attention, your patronage, and your support. And I feel like it's easy enough to stay silent and pretend that it's listening, but silence doesn't last forever. Listening doesn't last forever. And one of the reasons that this pattern of disparity has been allowed to continue is because people say nothing. And I'm not doing that. So I thank you for listening if you've made it this far in the video. I will link to this article where it is on Medium if you'd like to read it instead. And of course, check out the resources that I've included because there are so many people out there who are so talented, and they're the ones that I want you to read their experience, their words, their suggestions, because these are the leaders that we should be following.